At 74 years old, for the very first time in my life, I had something that was truly, completely my own. It was a home in Scottsdale, one that belonged to me, one I had spent a lifetime saving up for. But I barely had time to settle in before my own daughter pulled me right out of that beautiful place to face a very harsh reality. And what was that reality? Well, you'll want to stick around to hear what happened next. My name is Helen. I'm a recently retired widow, and for my entire life, I lived for my husband and my children. I figured at this point, it was time I did something for myself. I was standing out on my new balcony, taking a deep breath of that dry desert air, catching the faint, sweet scent of bougainvillea from the garden below. This was the first piece of property in my whole life that was entirely mine. Not ours, not the family's, just Helen's. It was a sweet little secret I'd kept to myself for 6 whole months, from the day I put the deposit down to today, my very first day actually living here. This money didn't just fall out of the sky. It was the result of nearly 50 years of pinching pennies, of all the lunches I packed for work instead of eating out, of the dresses I'd admire through a shop window and then just quietly walk away from, of every spare coin I tucked away in an old tin box hidden at the back of my closet. Arthur, my late husband, always said I was too frugal, but I knew I was saving for a dream I never even dared to speak aloud, a place of my very own. I turned and went back inside, my hand gliding over the cool, smooth granite of the kitchen island. Everything was just perfect, from the double-door refrigerator to the warm golden light fixtures hanging from the ceiling. I took the bouquet of white lilies, my favorite, and arranged them myself in a turquoise ceramic vase, placing it right in the center of the dining table. I arranged my Jane Austen novels on the bookshelf, the very ones my daughter Amanda always called sappy. Here, there was no one to judge. Here, I could just be me. I hadn't told Amanda yet. I kept telling myself I wanted to surprise her. But if I'm being honest, I was scared. I was scared she'd offer her input, which was her gentle word for taking over. Mom, you should have picked a different color for the curtains, or why didn't you get a bigger sofa so the grandkids have a place to play? I'd been hearing those kinds of things my whole life. This time, just this once, I wanted every single decision to be mine. A few days later, once I had everything just so, I called Margaret, my best friend since high school. Margaret, you are not going to believe this, I whispered into the phone, feeling like a young girl sharing a secret. I moved to Scottsdale. Margaret let out a whoop of joy. We must have talked for an hour. I told her everything about the sunshine, the book club I was planning to join, the incredible sense of peace I felt. I didn't know it then, but my own words, coming through a friend, would turn out to be a double-edged sword. A week later, I can picture the scene so vividly it gives me goosebumps. Margaret, in her sweet, innocent way, must have run into Amanda at the grocery store. "Congratulations, sweetie," she probably chirped. "Your mom is finally living for herself. I saw the pictures. That place in Scottsdale looks absolutely wonderful." I'm sure Amanda's smile froze on her face for a second. I know my daughter better than anyone. Behind that gentle exterior is a mind that's always calculating. I can just imagine the little glint in her eye, not of joy, but of something else, something that looked like a piece of her property had just been taken from her. A storm was gathering somewhere out there, and in my innocence, I was still enjoying the calm before it hit. The doorbell rang on a Thursday morning, pulling me away from my cup of chamomile tea. I was surprised when I looked through the peephole. It was Amanda. There she stood in an expensive summer dress, holding a perfectly wrapped basket of fresh fruit and wearing a smile so bright it was almost blinding. "Mom, I was in the neighborhood for work and thought I'd pop in for a surprise visit." My heart fluttered with a mix of joy and a little bit of anxiety. "Amanda, oh my goodness, come in, honey." I rushed to open the door, my heart filled with that simple happiness a mother feels when her daughter stops by unannounced. Amanda walked in, and immediately her performance began. Her eyes swept across the apartment, lighting up with a practiced brightness. She walked around, showering the place with compliments, but every compliment felt like a tiny needle prick against my skin. "Oh, wow, Mom, this place, it's unbelievable. It's even nicer than the pictures your friend sent me." She emphasized every word, letting me know she already knew that this visit wasn't a surprise at all. She walked into the kitchen, running her perfectly manicured fingers over the granite countertop. "This certainly wasn't cheap. You really know how to live it up, don't you?" Her tone had a subtle dig to it that only I could hear. It wasn't, "I'm happy for you," it was, "You spent money on this." Then she stepped out onto the balcony, where I'd set up a wicker chair for reading, overlooking a lush green golf course. "It's like a five-star resort," she marveled. "Living here all by yourself, it must be so peaceful and relaxing." And me, I was so caught up in the idea that my daughter had finally grown up and was genuinely happy for me, I let all my defenses down. I proudly showed her every little corner, every decorative piece I'd spent weeks picking out. "I bought this ceramic vase at a little art fair, and that painting is by a local artist." I chattered on, my joy making me forget that Amanda had never cared about art in her life. After she'd seen it all, we sat down on the plush sofa in the living room. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting long, bright stripes across the Turkish rug. And then, as if a switch had been flipped, the smile vanished from Amanda's face. She looked down at her hands, clasped tightly in her lap, and her shoulders began to tremble. I panicked, leaning toward her. "What is it, honey? Amanda, what's wrong?" Amanda looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed and glistening with tears. My beautiful, luxurious living room suddenly felt suffocating. The contrast between this opulent setting and the utter misery on my daughter's face created a surreal, painful feeling. "I'm happy for you, Mom. I really am," Amanda began, her voice cracking, breaking into a sob. "You deserve all of this, but when I see you living so wonderfully in this paradise, I can't help but think about the hell that we're going through." A chill. That's what I felt. A chill that ran right down my spine. She had just turned my happiness into a sin. She started to tell me the story, how Brian had been laid off, just like that, how the bank was calling constantly, threatening to foreclose on their house, how my grandchildren, my innocent grandbabies, would soon have no place to live. She was a brilliant actress. She deliberately, cruelly twisted the knife. "You have a balcony to watch the sunset, while my kids might end up sleeping on the street," she sobbed, tears streaming down her face. "You have a swimming pool, a clubhouse, and we're about to lose everything. I don't know what to do anymore, Mom." I was speechless. All the joy, all the pride I had in this home, it all evaporated, leaving behind nothing but a crushing guilt that sat on my chest like a boulder. The very luxury she had been praising had now become the physical evidence of my selfishness. How could I possibly enjoy this peace when my own flesh and blood was suffering? Once she had pushed my emotions to the peak of agony, Amanda delivered the knockout punch. She didn't just talk. She leaned down, opened the designer handbag she'd placed beside her, and instead of pulling out a tissue to dry her tears, she pulled out a professionally prepared, neatly clipped stack of papers. My heart seized. This wasn't a desperate spur-of-the-moment idea. This was a plan. "I've been thinking a lot," Amanda said, her voice now shifting to one of earnest hope, as if she'd just found a light at the end of the tunnel. "I don't want to ask you for money, Mom. I want a solution for both of us. Look at this." She placed the family care agreement on the glass coffee table, right in a patch of sunlight. The carefully typed black letters stood out, sharp and clear. "You'll sell this place and use the money to help us save our house. In return, I promise, I will take care of you for the rest of your life, so you'll never have to be alone again. It's my commitment, Mom, all here in writing." It was a fatal blow. The sheer premeditation was more terrifying than any amount of begging. It showed me she had planned every single move. I was completely overwhelmed, backed into a corner, trapped between the love for my child and grandchildren, my deep-seated fear of being alone, and the guilt she had so skillfully planted in my heart. Amanda leaned forward and took my cold, limp hand in hers, her eyes still brimming with tears. "You're our last hope, Mom. You won't abandon us, will you?" Amanda left. She didn't even stay to finish the glass of orange juice I poured for her. Her mission was accomplished. I sat motionless on that sofa for a long, long time after she was gone. The apartment was now frighteningly silent. The peace was gone, replaced by a heavy, oppressive emptiness. The sunlight I had loved so much now seemed to be mocking me. My little piece of heaven, my lifelong dream, had been turned into a gilded cage in a matter of hours. On the table, the contract lay there like a verdict. I picked it up, my old fingers trembling as they brushed against the cold paper. I read and reread the reasonable-sounding clauses. Party B, Amanda, commits to providing room and board and to care for the physical and mental well-being of Party A, Helen. All just hollow words. But all I could see in my mind were the faces of my grandchildren. What would they look like when they found out they were about to lose their home? I had spent my entire life building a wall of protection around my family. Now, I was being asked to take the very last bricks of my own personal fortress and use them to shore up theirs. I knew it was a trap. A small, weak, rational part of my mind was screaming. But the voice of a mother's heart, of a grandmother's heart, forged over decades of sacrifice, was louder than anything else. "This is the last sacrifice," I whispered to myself. It was both a promise and a curse. I reached for the phone and dialed the number of my real estate agent. My own voice, when it came out, sounded strangely calm in the empty room. "Hello? It's Helen. I'm calling about the condo in Scottsdale. I've decided to sell it." The other end of the line was silent for a moment, and then the agent's surprised voice came on. But I didn't hear any of it. I had already hung up the phone, and with it, I had hung up the only dream I ever had in my life. The sale of the condo in Scottsdale happened so fast it made my head spin, as if fate itself was in a hurry to push me into the trap that had been so carefully set. The money was wired directly into Amanda's account to solve the crisis. And then I packed up my life once again. The only difference was, this time, instead of moving to a sun-drenched paradise, I was walking into my daughter's house as I don't even know what to call myself anymore. A savior, a burden, or an investment. I had my answer on the very first day. As I dragged my last suitcase into the living room, I saw Doris, Brian's mother, lounging comfortably in the most luxurious leather armchair, her feet propped up on a velvet ottoman. She was watching a game show on the big screen TV, a plate of chocolate chip cookies in her hand. Amanda walked out of the kitchen holding a steaming cup. "Here's some chamomile tea to help you relax, Mom," she said to her mother-in-law, her voice as sweet as honey. "You just rest up. Don't lift a finger. You leave everything to me and Mom Helen." Then she turned to me. The smile was still there, but her eyes were different. The desperate pleading was gone, replaced by a cool, matter-of-fact tone of command. "Mom, after you finish unpacking, could you get started on dinner? The kids will be home soon. There's chicken and vegetables in the fridge." I stood there, frozen, my hand still gripping the handle of my suitcase. The room suddenly felt cold. I looked at Doris, who was leisurely nibbling on a cookie, then back at my daughter. The family care agreement that I had signed, with all its formal clauses, now flashed in my mind like some kind of cruel joke. I wasn't the one being cared for. I was the one who was here to care. I had sold my freedom to buy a place in this house, and that place was the role of the unpaid help. The days that followed blurred into an endless cycle of chores. My dawn began before the sun was even up, with the hum of the washing machine and the smell of coffee brewing for Brian. I'd make breakfast, pack lunches for the kids, and get them off to school. Then I'd come back to clean the house, do the grocery shopping, and start prepping for dinner. Amanda, my daughter, now played the part of the busy lady of the house. She spent most of her time in her office, claiming she was looking for freelance design projects, but mostly I'd just hear her laughing on the phone with her friends. Every penny I had was controlled. When I first moved in, Amanda had made a very reasonable suggestion. To make it easier to manage the household expenses, why don't you just give me your bank card to hold on to? If you need anything, just let me know. At the time, I thought it was a good idea. But now, whenever I needed to buy something for myself, even something as small as a skein of yarn or a tube of hand cream, I had to justify it. And the response I usually got was a long, drawn-out sigh. "Mom, we're in a really tight spot right now. You should try to be more frugal." Meanwhile, Doris was living a completely different life under the same roof. She was treated like a queen. Amanda took her for weekly manicures, bought her soft cashmere sweaters, and always made sure her favorite dessert was stocked in the fridge. I'd often see the two of them sitting on the sofa together, flipping through old photo albums and laughing. One time, while I was on my hands and knees scrubbing the kitchen floor, I heard Doris's voice float out. "Amanda, you are truly the best daughter-in-law in the world." Amanda replied, her voice dripping with sweetness, "Oh, Mom, it's my duty." I just kept scrubbing, my tears mixing in with the dirty water in the bucket. I was like a ghost in my own tragedy, an unwilling audience member to the play of happiness my daughter was performing for her mother-in-law. I was the one who had paid for this stage, for the fancy costumes and the lavish meals, but my role didn't have a single line. A mother's trust is like a rubber band. You can stretch it very, very far, but eventually it's going to snap. The first cracks in my rubber band started to show on a Tuesday afternoon. I was cleaning Brian's home office when he walked in, talking excitedly on his phone. "Yeah, it's a huge contract. The commission on this one will be enough for us to trade up to that new SUV. I'll tell Amanda later." He saw me, quickly ended the call, and looked a little flustered. He had never lost his job. Maybe things had been a little shaky for a while, but he was certainly a long way from losing the house, like Amanda had tearfully claimed. The second crack, the one that broke everything, appeared a few days later. I was taking out the recycling from the kitchen when I saw a bank envelope mixed in with a pile of old newspapers. Curious, I opened it. It was a copy of Amanda's credit card statement. My heart just stopped. The date on the statement was from about a week after I had sold my condo. And there, amongst the smaller charges, were two huge items that jumped right off the page. One payment to a luxury resort in Hawaii and another to a high-end designer boutique I knew sold handbags that cost more than my entire monthly pension. She had lied. No, it was more than a lie. It was a cold, calculated betrayal. She had taken my money, the money from my shattered dream, to fund her own lavish lifestyle. She had cried on my shoulder about losing her home while she was actually planning a vacation in paradise. And that paradise was built on the ashes of mine. I quickly stuffed the statement into the pocket of my apron, my heart hammering in my chest. I looked around the house. Suddenly, everything looked fake. The plush sofa, the expensive painting on the wall, even the smiles of my daughter and son-in-law. It was all part of one big performance, and I was the unwitting sponsor. The final awakening came on a Friday evening during the family dinner. The mood was cheerful. Brian had just closed his new deal, and Amanda had decided we should celebrate. Of course, I was the one who cooked the celebratory feast. As everyone was eating dessert, Doris complained offhandedly. "The TV in my room was a little small. I have a hard time reading the subtitles." Brian, ever the devoted son, jumped right in. "Oh, don't you worry about that, Mom. This weekend, I'll go out and get you the newest 70-inch TV, so you can watch in style." Amanda nodded in agreement, smiling at her mother-in-law. "That's right, Mom. Just tell Brian which one you like." It was all so warm, a perfect family. And then I dared to speak. My voice sounded small and out of place. "Amanda, I was thinking of getting a haircut this weekend, and I wanted to buy some yarn to knit a sweater for my granddaughter. Could, could I have $50, please?" Silence fell over the table. Amanda put her fork down. She didn't look at me. She looked at her plate of cake. Then she sighed, a dramatic sigh, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Mom," she said, her voice filled with disappointment, "don't you understand how difficult things are for us? Brian is just getting back on his feet. We have to be careful with every penny. You should try to be more frugal." It was a slap in the face, an invisible one, but the sting was so sharp it was stunning. Buying a 70-inch TV for her mother-in-law was fine, but $50 for her own mother's haircut and knitting yarn was an extravagance. The audacity, the injustice, the pure contempt in her voice washed over me like a bucket of ice water. In that single moment, the rubber band snapped. The pain and the sacrifice inside of me didn't disappear, but they crystallized into something else, something cold and hard as a diamond. It was rage. I lifted my head and looked directly at my daughter, then at my son-in-law, and finally at his mother. For the first time, I saw everything with perfect clarity. I wasn't a member of this family. I was a resource that had been mined until it was empty. And once my value was gone, I was treated like a burden. I didn't say a word. I quietly stood up, collected my dishes, and took them to the kitchen. But as I turned my back, I knew that the trusting Helen, the ever-sacrificing mother, had died right there at that dinner table. Someone else was being born from her ashes, someone that even I didn't know yet. But I knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to stay silent forever. After that fateful night, I stopped crying. It was as if the tears had all dried up, leaving a terrifyingly quiet space inside me. I still cooked, I still cleaned, I still drove the kids, but I did it all like a machine. I no longer tried to make conversation, no longer looked for any little scrap of warmth from my daughter. I was building a wall of ice around my heart, and every cold word from Amanda, every dismissive gesture from Brian, just made that wall taller and stronger. I was waiting. I didn't know what I was waiting for, but I knew I couldn't live like this forever. My chance came on a Wednesday afternoon when Amanda and Brian took Doris for a routine doctor's appointment. For the first time in weeks, the house was silent. This silence wasn't sweet like it was in Scottsdale. It was heavy, and it was filled with opportunity. My hands trembled as I dug out my old cell phone, the one I had packed away at the very bottom of my suitcase. I plugged it in, and when the screen lit up, I dialed Margaret's number. "Margaret, it's me, Helen," I whispered, even though I knew no one was home. My voice was hoarse from not having a real conversation in so long. "Helen, oh my God, you finally called. I've been worried sick. What on earth happened?" And then it all came pouring out. I told her about Doris, about my life as a servant, about the 70-inch TV and the $50 refusal. I told her about the credit card statement, about the Hawaiian vacation that was paid for with the sale of my dream. I cried, but not the tears of a weak woman. These were the tears of anger and humiliation that had been bottled up for far too long. On the other end of the line, Margaret listened in silence. She didn't interrupt, she didn't judge. When I had finally finished, she asked me only one question, her voice firm and clear. "Helen, you are not a prisoner. I'm only going to ask you this once. Do you want to get out of there?" "I do," I answered, without a shred of hesitation. "But I don't know how." "Don't you worry," Margaret said. "You're not alone. We are going to get you out of there." For the first time in months, a tiny spark of hope flickered to life inside me. I wasn't a ghost anymore. I had an ally. We planned everything meticulously over a series of secret phone calls. Margaret, with the practical mind of a retired accountant, guided me through every step. "First things first," she'd said, "evidence. You have to have evidence." So I began my own quiet investigation. I secretly took a photo of Amanda's credit card statement with my phone. I found the PDF of the family care agreement she had sent me and forwarded it to Margaret's email. I started writing everything down in a little notebook. Dates, the chores I did, the times I was denied money. That notebook became my indictment. The golden opportunity came sooner than I expected. One morning, Amanda announced with a cheerful face, "Everyone, this weekend we're all going on a little getaway to a resort in the mountains. Brian got a bonus trip for the whole family." She turned to Doris. "You're going to love it, Mom. They even have a spa." Then she looked at me. "You can stay home and watch the house. Make sure everything's safe. Besides, you need your rest." My rest. The irony in those words was just staggering. But I just nodded, trying to hide the wave of relief and excitement that washed over me. This was it. The cage door was open. On Saturday morning, after their brand new SUV, filled with their laughter and chatter, disappeared around the corner, I sprang into action. I packed only the most important things, my personal documents, a few changes of clothes, my photo album of Arthur, and the notebook, my evidence. I didn't take much because most of what I truly owned had been left behind in Scottsdale. At 10 o'clock sharp, Margaret's car pulled up to the curb. She came inside and wrapped me in a tight hug. "You look worn to the bone," she whispered, "but it's okay. It all ends now." The two of us, old friends, one 74 and the other 75, carried out a spectacular escape. We moved quickly and quietly like spies in an old movie. The scene was probably a little comical, but the tension was absolutely real. Every noise from the street made my heart jump. When the last suitcase was in the trunk, I went back into the house one last time. But not for one last look. I went back to leave my final message. On the dining room table, the very place where I had suffered my greatest humiliation, I placed a single white envelope. This was my twist. Margaret's idea, perfected by my own pain. Inside the envelope wasn't some tear-stained letter begging for pity. It was a weapon. It contained 3 things. First, a printout of the family care agreement that Amanda had drafted. Across the top, in a red marker I found in my grandchild's pencil case, I had written 2 huge words, "Breach of contract." Second, a short, typed letter, completely devoid of emotion. "Amanda and Brian, as you have failed to provide the physical and mental well-being stipulated in our agreement, I consider this contract null and void. I have vacated the premises. You will find an invoice for my services rendered attached." And third, the culmination of our plan, a sheet of paper with a bold heading, "Invoice for Services." Below it, I had listed everything in professional detail, just like Margaret showed me. Housekeeping and cleaning services, 10 hours a day times 65 days at $30 an hour, $13,000. Cooking services, 3 meals a day times 65 days at $30 a day, $1,950. Child care and transportation, 4 hours a day times 45 school days at $18 an hour, $3,240. Total due, $18,190. At the bottom of the page, I concluded in a cold tone I barely recognized as my own. The $250,000 from the sale of my condo, minus the service fees above, comes to a total of $231,810, which must be transferred back into my account within 30 days. If not, my attorney will be in formal contact with you regarding the charge of elder trust fraud under Arizona state law. I placed the envelope squarely in the middle of the table, then turned and walked away without a backward glance. I wasn't there to see it, but I can picture the scene perfectly. Amanda and Brian returning from their trip, tanned and in high spirits, the moment they walk in and see the envelope. I can imagine Amanda's face shifting from curiosity to disbelief, and then to pure rage as she read my words. That old woman, how dare she? I can almost hear her shriek, her voice high with panic. I can picture Brian scanning the invoice and the legal threat, his face going pale with fear. Their self-satisfaction would have shattered into a million pieces. They weren't afraid of hurting me, but they were terrified of legal consequences and public shame. That was their weak spot, and this time I had hit it dead center. Margaret and I were sitting on the balcony of my new rental apartment, not even halfway through our first glass of iced tea as free women. And then it came. My phone, which had been silent for weeks, suddenly shrieked, a frantic, piercing ring like an alarm. The screen lit up with the name Amanda. Margaret looked at me, her eyes steady. "Are you ready?" I took a deep breath and nodded. I was ready. I answered the call and put it on speaker.
Hello?
Amanda's scream from the other end was so loud it made me flinch. It was shrill, filled with a mix of fury and confusion. "Mom, what in the world are you doing? What is this? What is this ridiculous invoice?" I kept my voice calm, even. "Hello, Amanda." I thought it was all quite clear. "Clear?" she screeched, and I could hear her gasping for air. "You walk out without a word and leave behind this absurd demand for money? After everything we've done for you, we gave you a home?" "No," I replied, my voice like ice. "You didn't give me a home. I bought it with my own home. And that piece of paper isn't ridiculous, Amanda. It's an itemized list of my labor." Behind Amanda's yelling, I could hear a chaotic mix of other sounds. Brian's panicked voice chiming in. "Amanda, ask her what she wants. She mentioned a lawyer." Then came Doris's voice, sharp and annoyed. "What's all the commotion about? Who's going to make dinner?" That question, so innocently cruel, was the final drop of fuel on the fire inside me. Amanda continued her tirade. "Labor? You're my mother. It's your duty. You're tearing this family apart. What are people going to think of us?" Ah, there it was. The truth. She wasn't afraid of hurting me. She was afraid of being judged by others. That was her fatal flaw. I smiled, a smile Amanda couldn't see, but I'm sure she could feel it in the tone of my voice. "What people will think? It's funny you should ask that, Amanda." I paused for a beat, letting the silence hang in the air. "I called your Aunt Carol and a few old friends this morning. I just wanted to let them know I'd moved so they wouldn't worry. Of course, I had to tell them the whole story so they'd understand." On the other end of the line, I heard a sharp, choked gasp. I knew I'd hit my mark. Our network of mutual friends, the very people Amanda worked so hard to look perfect for. I could just picture her face draining of all its color. But I wasn't finished. "And as for that invoice," I continued, my voice dangerously soft, "you don't need to worry about that little bit of money. I've already decided what I'm going to do with that $18,190. I glanced at Margaret. She gave me a proud, encouraging nod. "I'm going to use the entire amount to make an anonymous donation to the women's shelter in Phoenix. The check will be sent with a small note. In honor of mothers whose care is taken for granted." Silence. A dead, heavy silence from the other end. No more screaming. No more panicked whispers from Brian. Even Doris's complaints seemed to have died out. All I could hear was Amanda's ragged, shallow breathing, as if she'd just been punched in the gut. I hadn't just demanded my money back. I had taken back my story. I had turned my humiliation into an act of grace, a retaliation more elegant and more brutal than any curse word could ever be. I let the silence stretch for a few more seconds before I delivered the final line. "You have 29 days left, Amanda. Goodbye." I didn't wait for her to reply. I calmly reached out and ended the call. The flat, final beep echoed in the quiet air, severing the final tie. I set the phone down on the table, face down. It was done. It really, truly done. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the warmth of the afternoon sun on my face. Margaret reached over and squeezed my hand. 6 months passed like a gentle dream. I found my rhythm again in my retirement community. I joined the book club, took up water aerobics, and even started taking watercolor painting classes. My little rental apartment was small, but it was always filled with the laughter of friends and the smell of whatever I was baking. I wasn't waiting for the phone to ring anymore. I was too busy living my life. One Sunday morning, Margaret came by with a box of donuts and a mischievous smile. We were out on my balcony tending to my little pots of basil and cherry tomatoes when she spoke. "Helen, you will never guess what I just heard." I looked up, still pinching a yellowed leaf. "What's that?" "You remember Amanda's house in Phoenix?" "How could I forget?" I said, a hint of dry humor in my voice. Margaret took a sip of her coffee. "Well, it went up for sale last week." I froze. "They're selling the house? But the money should have been enough to clear their debts." "Ah, well, that's the interesting part," Margaret said, leaning forward. "They paid you back, yes, but to get that much cash that quickly, Brian had to take out a high-interest loan from a private lender. And Amanda, with her spending habits, just couldn't cut back. They tried to keep their heads above water for a few months, but eventually they defaulted." She continued, her voice full of vivid details, like she was reading a report. "The brand-new SUV was sold and replaced with an old sedan. Brian had to take a second job in the evenings delivering for a pizza place. And Amanda, ever the image-conscious one, had to sell her collection of designer handbags online. And here's the kicker," Margaret said, her eyes sparkling. "Doris. What about his mother? After they sold the house, the whole family had to move into a rented townhouse, half the size of the old place. And of course, Doris had to move in with them. The neighbors there say she complains constantly. She complains about the small room, about not having any help around the house, about how Amanda doesn't take her to the spa every week anymore. Amanda, who used her mother-in-law to torment you, is now being tormented by her every single day in a cramped space." Margaret chuckled. "It's a true case of what goes around comes around." I didn't laugh. I just listened quietly. A strange feeling settled over me. It wasn't gloating joy, but a deep, profound sense of peace, of cosmic justice. "And what about their friends?" I asked softly. "Oh, you know. After you told your side of the story to Carol and the others, the news got around. No one says anything to their faces, of course, but the invitations to dinner parties and charity events have all dried up. Their image as the perfect, successful family is completely shattered. For someone like Amanda, that's probably the worst punishment of all." I nodded, looking out into the distance. I pictured it. Amanda, trapped in a small house with a nagging mother-in-law and an exhausted husband, ostracized by the very society she tried so hard to impress. They didn't lose their house because of me. They lost it because of their own greed and their own foolishness. They tried to put me in a cage, only to end up locking themselves in one that was far worse. I turned back to my cherry tomato plant, gently patting a little more soil around its base. The tiny, glossy tomatoes were just beginning to blush red in the morning sun. They weren't as glamorous as the fruit basket Amanda had brought me that day, but they were real. They were the fruit of my own care. "They say loneliness is the scariest part of getting old," I said, my voice thoughtful. "But they're wrong. The scariest part is being made to feel invisible by your own family. Now, I might be alone, but I am no longer invisible." I picked a ripe tomato from the vine and popped it into my mouth. The taste was bright and sweet. It was the taste of freedom. A freedom that had cost me a house, but in return, I had found a home, right here, inside myself.